Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. And today we have a guest, Barry Zworestine, and he is the author of Which Way is Your Warrior Facing? An operational manual for current serving and veterans transitioning into veteran life. Hope you can see that. So I'm going to just share a little bit about him before he shares his story. So the beginnings of Which Way is Your Warrior Facing were born in Barry's experiences as a fighting medic in the Rhodesian Bush War in 1976. The lessons and his insights grew as he struggled through his journey forwards and the many overwhelming challenges that faced him. These were further consolidated by his experience running marathons and ultramarathons, where he was challenged to redefine himself at the edges of his discomfort. But perhaps most of all, the forming of this book began in 2002 when he began a life-changing journey working with veterans and current serving. Which Way is Your Warrior Facing speaks from the language of the veteran's territory. It guides the veteran forward by drawing on already existing skill sets and operational protocols. It maps out the key points to be aware of, such as loss of tribe, belonging, moral injuries, grief, not feeling good enough, redefinition of self, adjustment challenges, purpose and meaning, to note just a few. Which Way is Your Warrior Facing offers you an invitation to move beyond the parameters of the book. Interwoven through the pages are opportunities to self-reflect and write your thoughts down in the spaces provided. Through engaging in this process, you will learn to be more proactive in approaching your journey. You will be invited to move from the passenger seat of just being the reader to writing your own story and ultimately transforming the book to the point where you become the author of your own journey. Your book will then become your map and your compass. It can become a shared activity with those you care deeply about. The book can support you to share stories and insights that you cannot speak aloud. It will help you to bridge back home and connect with your loved ones. And I want to mention also the people that have done reviews of Barry's book are people that we love on this group. I mean, Doc Shauna Springer has written a review, John McCaskill, Tom Satterley, and then others that I don't know. But these are people that, you know, we trust and have integrity, and they wrote beautiful reviews of his book. So with all that being said, I want to warmly welcome you, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's a real gift to be here, and I'm glad we could find a time because I work in a school during the day and I work with veterans in the evening. So when I could be in my school holidays and join you guys, and look forward actually in my next holidays in September is joining you guys as well. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, why don't you share a little bit about yourself? Tell us about yourself and where you're headed.
Look, as you heard, I come from an interesting background, an interesting war. I blasted out in 1977 back into university. In those days, I don't think we even had an awareness of post-traumatic stress disorder. All I knew was that 3 weeks later, I was at university waking up 20, 30 times a night. I had body aches and pains. I don't think I ever had PTSD, but I'd say I had I'd say I would have had combat stress, but I was still fairly functional. But saying I was still fairly functional, I then screamed out into life, and over the next 40 years, went through 2 marriages, a couple of relationships, and 5 immigrations. So, you know, I think something wasn't working well. But they were all good lessons. They were all good lessons. In my case, you know, I didn't use alcohol, but I certainly used running, and I found my peace in running. And clearly what was going to happen was the longer I ran, the better I would feel. And after, I think my final ultramarathon was a thing called Comrades Marathon in South Africa, which is an 84-kilometer uphill marathon. It starts and then just goes uphill. And then I blew my iliotibial in my leg. And somebody actually said to me, "What are you running away from?" And that hit me like a sledgehammer, because I realized that, yeah, I was definitely running away. But I also recognize that part of my background and my personality is that I tend to push the edges of things anyway. So, I'm fortunate and really blessed in the fact that 9 years ago, I met an extraordinary woman. She's Brazilian, and she came here on a graduate visa, and I married her, and I discovered that life can be nurturing, life can give you love and care, and that it can be consistent. So I have 3 kids, a daughter in South Africa with her mother. I have my son behind me, who's a first responder here in Australia. And I have another son who is a photographer and who is very focused on my service. And so I have these 2 extraordinary boys that I spend a lot of time talking to. So I'm a very fortunate man. And as I said, made more fortunate by the fact that in 2002, when I arrived back in Australia, I heard about what was called the Vietnam Veterans Counseling Services, which is the government service counseling department and the prime one in this country. And I meandered my way to Sydney at that point, and I approached them, and they heard about my history in the military and the fact that I was a psychologist, and they took me on. And so for 20 years, I have sat began with the tail end of the World War II boys. They were in their 80s and 90s, and they were characters. And then I meandered my way through the Vietnam veterans for many years. And then they tended to subside, and many of them are passing away, as my generation are. And then I started getting to the Afghan boys and the Iraq boys. And I've had the privilege of sitting with incredible men and women for 20 years. And, I always say, as much as I might have changed their lives, they have really definitely made me a better person. And I say it quite openly, a better person, a father, a husband, and a bloke. And it is through my interactions with them. That book is, and I'll talk about the process of that, but that book is finally everything that they and we have learned in the space between us as I got better at working with veterans. What I want to say is that my breed, the psychologists, you walk into my room, you will sit in the chair that's placed in the room for you, and I will have my modalities, and they will be the tools I use, and I will measure your depression, anxiety, and stress, and we will formulate strategies to manage it. Now, I'm not bagging that at all, but as a veteran, something began to change in me, and a psychologist kind of intermingling together. I became aware that even as a clinical psychologist, I wasn't getting to stuff. I'm trained psychodynamically, which means I'm really good at the kind of the listening and the connecting. It's part of who I am. I want to know about people. I want to connect. And I realized that these people I was sitting with, it took me a while to formulate this, but they weren't clients. I'm not a businessman. I don't have clients. And they weren't patients because, well, we're not in a hospital the last time I looked, but they were my brothers. And, I realized I love these guys. And often our sessions would finish where they'd go, "Love you, brother." And that's what it was about. I also realized that I had a responsibility. My responsibility was, what was I going to do to change? Even as a combat veteran, I know the territory. I know the smells. I know, even though some people it's more acute than others, our feet have been on the ground. But it wasn't enough. And for me to expect them to come into my room and I was going to use my modalities on them, it felt like it was a bit like I expected them to enter my territory and then pay attention to my tools. And I realized, well, what would it look like? How would I get to a place where I stood in their territory? They didn't walk through my door, but I was going to walk through their door. And I was going to listen and I was going to learn. And through understanding their territory, my responsibility was, what did my toolbox look like? And my toolbox would be, one or two little modalities is not enough. When you go to war, when you a first responder, you don't have one tool. So I had a responsibility to learn, to re-educate myself. And I spent a lot of time learning about the brain and neuroscience and EMDR. And ultimately, I even went beyond EMDR. And I'm happy to come back one day and talk about brain spotting, which is actually by a guy called David Grand in America. And if there's time, I'm happy to talk about why I like that. What David Grand says is that if you think you know what somebody needs, you've just made your first mistake. If you are leading, you've just made your second mistake. You should be walking shoulder to shoulder and following, not leading or thinking you know what they mean. The brain is too complex. So I realized that I wasn't so switched on as I thought. I was a psychologist and here I was going to heal all these people. Till eventually, after about 2 years, I was sitting in my chair and I realized, I think there are parts of me that are a little bit not working so well. And at that point, humility began to set in. And and as I said, my challenge was, how do I flip around what I'm doing so we're working from in the territory? And over time, it began to be a lot clearer. I realized that in military territory, everything, and even in first responder territory, everything you need is already in the learning that you have been trained into. So, for example, in the military, we have a thing called a pull-through. And a pull-through is when you drop a weighted lead, a weighted piece of metal with a cloth tied onto a piece of string down your barrel, and you pull it through and it cleans the barrel. We know that if we don't clean our weapon, three things are going to happen. The one is you'll have an accidental discharge, which means it fires off without you pulling the trigger. The second one is that it's a stoppage. So a round gets caught in the barrel. And then if you pull another one, it looks interesting. And the other one, more with an MAG, a machine gun, is that we have a runaway gun. So that means you're holding this massive thing and it's just shooting off on its uncontrollably and you can't stop it. And I started to realize that the wisdom's already there. Why am I trying to come from my territory and teach the tools when I need to sit in their territory and find the wisdom? And part of what I'll talk about later is I feel there's an ownership on the part of people working with veterans that, and in my book, I say it, when a veteran walks in your room, he sits where he wants to sit, you move. You have to earn the right to be trusted, not the other way around. And you have to learn about where they are, who they are, their language, the resources, the strengths, the tools, and the strategies they already know. And that was part of what my book is about, is you don't have to go to war or be in the military to show the respect, to first understand the territory of the people you're sitting with before you expect them to walk in your room and they have to fit into the modalities you use. So I started talking to veterans as they walked into my room. Well, first of all, forming the connection, but then I'd say to them, hey, mate, what's happening? I'm really angry. I'm out of control. I'm not sleeping. I'm drinking. I'm irritable all the time. My wife is complaining or my partner is complaining. And I go, so let's look at your pull-throughs. What are you doing? They go, what do you mean? I go, well, what's your nutrition? What's your sleep like? What do you do to stay well and stay healthy? What's your discipline every day? I'd explain to them that when you stop doing what you used to do when you were in your organization, when you were a first responder or you were in the military, the things you do every day. You clean your weapon every day. You maintain wellness, well-being, fitness, all your gear. When we do that, we're always in the driver's seat, no matter how difficult. And I say to them, by doing small things every day, you move from a sense of disempowerment to moving into the front seat of your car. So before we even talk about your trauma, let's look at your pull-throughs and get you back in the front seat. Now you're driving through the hell that you're going through, but you've got some control. And so we'll look at small things. Like for some people, it could be get up and walk around the block, go and pick up the post, have a regular shower. Admiral McCraven, make your bed. Get up every day, make your bed. They're simple acts of exercise of will. And the other thing I explain to veterans is that think about one thing. The one thing you've learned is how to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Sleep deprivation, high risk, getting dirty, adversity, challenges of territory. When you're training, it's when it starts. So I explain that to create change, if you want to stay in your comfort zone, nothing's going to happen. Nobody ever changes by being comfortable. You have to find manageable levels of discomfort, and then you need to become comfortable being uncomfortable. So what I'm working right from the very beginning, before they even leave my room for the first time, we identify pull-throughs. What are you going to do? And then let's look at what gets in the way. I'm not touching their trauma at that point. I'm using their territory, their knowledge, and their skill sets. I remind them, did you used to clean your weapon every day? They go, yep. So I go, what's stopping you now? When the conditions were adverse, when you were exhausted and you were tired, did you just forget about your weapon and your gear? Did you forget to check what you were carrying on you? They go, no, never. Our survival depended on it. So I remind them that that skill set is still there. So why are you neglecting it now? So even in the worst case scenario where people are going, well, I'm depressed and it's hard to move, I go, I hear that. But even when it's hard to move, pick up a phone and phone somebody. A 24-hour line. Crawl out of bed if you have to and go and check the post. Sit down at the table and have a cup of coffee or whatever it is, but do something. It's ultramarathon running taught me a valuable lesson that I use for the guys. When you can't run, you can walk. When you can't walk, you can crawl. And if you can't crawl, sit down on the side of the road for a while, but then get up, dust off, and keep going. So the biggest thing I'm working with initially is what comes from the territory and what they know. I remind them about who they were. And in many ways, what I often say is that who you were had so much value. I see so many veterans leave the military, and often there are issues of, I don't feel good enough. I didn't do much. I was in admin. I didn't go into combat, or if I went into combat, I didn't see much at all. So I'm not good enough. And I talk to the blokes and go, would you ever have left a man behind or a person behind? And they go, God forbid, no. I go, so why have you left yourself behind? I said, we're on a rescue mission. And the first part of what it is to go back and rescue the positive parts of who you are. And when you combine the veteran or first responder with a civilian, you actually get an extraordinary human being, because what are the values that we all have as being in service? Dependability, reliability, endurance, care, and we will put others first before us. Now, I think those values are a little bit thin on the ground in civilian life. It's more me-centered. I'm not saying for everyone. But when we combine those values and those strengths and those attributes with the civilian, we have an extraordinary human being. So part of it is our rescue mission to collect who you are, so you have a sense of pride. Now, how it then develops is that I explain to the guys that a stoppage is like depression. You're not cleaning your weapon, you get stuck. It's like everything inside you gets stuck. An accidental discharge, is uncontrollable, sudden acts of stress, aggression, and anger. And a runaway gun is when you're just out of control. Nobody wants to be around you. And in many ways, I think many of us came back from war and we were runaway guns. We brought the war back into our families. And we became the adverse territory for the people we love. So we flip it. In war, they're the enemy, and we are working with the enemy. In our families, when we recreate the war at home, we become the enemy, and they are the people walking on eggshells in fear. And I've often had guys go, well, I can't control my anger. And I go, well, hang on, let's just step back a little bit. When you were working in Afghanistan and you went through a village and men and women were throwing rubbish at you and swearing at you, you go and shoot them? They go, no, of course not. So I went, so hang on a second. So they were doing adverse things, but you were able to keep it in focus and behave within protocol. Go, absolutely. So I go, so your wife gets angry with you and you react like maybe there's a lack of fit and she's not even the enemy. And they go, yep, you're right. So I'm always flipping back into the territory. And I realized that the more the person I'm sitting with and myself go back into that territory and learn from there, rather than from a top-down approach of, I am the psychologist, there are my qualifications, and you are my client, I seem to be working a lot better. And I don't think my capacity to get there is just because of being a combat veteran. I think anyone can get there by learning about who these extraordinary people are, whether first responders or veterans. And it's a generic, I'll just call it veterans a lot of the time. But who they are, how they speak, how they think, the language of their territory. I saw a veteran and he said to me, I was seeing someone before you and it didn't work. And I went, why? He said, I walked into the room and I sat down on the chair and the psychologist said, that's my chair, you need to move. And he said, okay. And he walked straight out the room. Now, if you're working with veterans, what have you learned? They sit where they want. First you form the relationship. Veterans, first responders, we are geared to be in tribe. Tribe is based by shared experiences that build trust. We are not good at walking into a stranger feeling disempowered who tells us what's wrong with us, where we disordered, and how they're going to treat it. But where's the relationship? Surely we should be spending building the relationship and trust before we get down to the work. So my whole approach has always been, what do we need to do to change? What do I need to do to suddenly start to put my ego in my back pocket, my qualifications in the other pocket, and start to get real? And so many years ago, I was working with guys from the Rhodesian Bush War at no cost around the world because we have had no access to services. We're dislocated, we don't belong anywhere. And a lot of folk, my age, we're in our late 60s. And, they've struggled with trauma for a long time without even knowing they've been struggling with trauma. And so I put together a little book because I'd been writing things on a Facebook group that I belonged to for Rhodesians. And I put it all together and I wrote, it looked like this, the very first one, which is no longer available. I had to take it out, but it was called Which Way is Your Claymore Facing? And the reason I wrote Which Way is Your Claymore Facing, you get that one, Aidan, is that, Claymore is a rounded device filled with ball bearings and it says facing outwards. And if many of us, the way we live our world, we're stupid enough to point it towards us or others and then flip the switch with the battery and we blow everyone or ourselves to hell. And it was a case of like, which way is your claymore and where are the claymores in your room? And I often use that term with the guys I work with. I go, you got a lot of claymores that you've been shoving away in the back room. And I said to them, one day somebody's going to join the wire. And my belief is always that gets joined as you age. I eventually took myself out of running because I was running until a few months ago. I'm 69 this year and I was running in extreme heat. My wife said to me, you're going to kill yourself one day on my trails. I live on the national park. And she was right, but I was not running wise. And eventually I took myself out of running. And it was actually a very good thing because age will stop you using the tools you've always used to get away with what you're doing. Extreme sports, you can drink yourself to death, but at some point that alcohol is going to wear you out. Our bodies are like vehicles, they will wear out. And I still have a sneaking suspicion, although I've put it out, there's still a couple of Claymores in my back room. And I'm praying that with everything I do every single day, they just stay there. You see, I think we're never going to do a room clear completely. Every one of us, every guy I sit with, I explain to them, we're not going to get rid of all these Claymores. We just want to get rid of enough to get you back in your bodies, to feel good about who you are, and then get on with your life. I have funny habits. My wife, we go to a restaurant. She says, that chair's facing the door. Do you want to sit there? And I go, yep, please. And as I sit in that chair, I'm looking at this and I'm going, get a life. Seriously, you're a psychologist and you need to face doorways 47 years after your war. And then this other voice says, so what? It's probably a good skill nowadays. And it is a little bit on the tangent, but yeah, I'm comfortable with it. I'm functional. I relate well. So if I've got some funny habits, they're probably no funnier than others. And that's what I explain to guys. I normalize. For a lot of the guys, I go, it's okay. Now, the second thing outside of service is that there's the point at which we leave service and we arrive at a new place, generally called civilian life. And a lot of my work over the years moved away from trauma-based stuff to this place here. And I realized that this place is a really interesting place, the transitional space. I realized the more I thought about it, I could see that it had not been, and I still do not believe it's been mapped out well at all. And one of the things I discovered, which is never really written about, was it came from me. I was in Australia, we march every year, and the Rhodesians are allowed to march with the Australian veterans. And I was with a bunch of Rhodesians, and they were our special forces, the summer guys for the SAS, our Salute Scouts, which were our very deep reconnaissance units that dressed like terrorists, black-faced at paints, had intermingled with them and did some interesting stuff. And the RLI, which were our commandos. And then there was me. And I remember thinking, geez, I don't deserve to be here. It's like, yep, I was in the war, but these guys are heroes. And I had this terrible sense of inadequacy, thinking, I just want to go home, take off my jacket, take off the things that we were given on my jacket and just put it away. I didn't want to go near there because I felt very uncomfortable. And so I started asking guys, how do you feel about wearing your medals? And 90% of the time, there'd be this flicker and they go, oh, probably not so good. And the more I sat with guys, I realized this sense of not being good enough, the shame of not being good enough. And no one's talking about that. We don't want to go there. And then the other one, I realized more and more over time that anger is just a symptom. I think at the core of who we all are, we carry the most profound grief, deep grief in our bodies. And in the transitional space, it's that profound grief of loss of self, loss of tribe. I'm not even talking about loss of mates. I'm talking about transitional challenges, loss of identity, loss of belonging, loss of purpose. And we grieve. And that grief may also go back into the military if we've had experiences of losses. And grief is the one space none of us like to get to. I don't like getting to grief. My wife and I will sit and watch a movie and she'll look at me like, what did I do once? I think I watched Sniper, which was a bad mistake. And she looked at me and she said, you okay? And I'm watching myself at this point and I'm going, yep. She goes, no, you're not. I go, I'm fine. Trust me. She goes, I can see you're not okay. I go, I am fine. And she said, come here. She gave me a hug. Next thing, I'm in tears. And I think that all of us carry profound grief. Now, as people together, when I sit with the folk I'm sitting with, it's okay to grieve. And we can grieve together. So everything I'm doing, I'm not even going into the trauma base, the ambush you might have been in, the assault or the discrimination you might have experienced. First, we're grounding ourselves in the body. Now, they say that there's two approaches. There's a top-down approach. That's my cat, sorry. He's brought his mouse and he wants to play. It's a weird cat. There's a top-down approach, which is where we work here. So you might have anxiety And I'll be saying to you, so let's talk about your thinking. Let me just ask him to leave. So I'll say to what they'll say to you is, let's talk about your thinking. What are your negative thoughts? Now, that part works when we clear and grounded in our bodies. And the one thing I explain to veterans, and again, I use operational terms. So I'm just going to close the door. Hang on. So the one thing I explain to veterans is that there's this part of the brain and this part of the brain. And again, and I do this in the first time we meet, but I use operational terminology. This one is your ambush zone. In your ambush zone, there's your trip flares that fire off as soon as somebody trips the line. There's your Claymores. It's your killing zone. It's where everything is just in pure emotion. And here is what we call your OP. And an OP is an observation post. So, you know, it's where you might be a sniper sitting on top of a building, just observing stuff below you, analyzing, categorizing, planning, observing. In the military, it might be on top of a hill or a mountain where you sit quietly. It's very calm. It's very focused. It's purely, it's the functioning of the front part of our brain. Now, what we know is when the front part of our brain, when the back part of our brain, and I'll say to the guys, when your ambush zone kicks up that way, there's reduced blood flow to the front part of your brain. So now you can't think, you can't plan, you can do nothing. If I'm going to try and talk to that person about his thinking when this one is shut down, that's like trying to break into a building through the front door, which is locked. You're not going to get there because it's shut down. And a lot of veterans say to me, well, I understand everything because I've been in with psychologists and etc. for many years, but you know, there's things in my body which have never changed. I understand, but I'm still stuck. Because where you stuck is in the back of the brain. It's what's in the body. So there's a direct relationship between the powerful and challenging situations you've been in and what lives in your body. And so what I will often do is, let's learn how to kick down the back of your brain. So part of my pull-throughs are, we got to get you out of your ambush zone so your OP starts to work. And this is the language I'm using. And I'll go, right, so let's look at what we can do. And then I give them a whole range of things. You know, for those of them, well, the simple ones are the breath work. You know, the Navy SEALs, etc., use things like box breathing. And box breathing is great. You breathe in for 5, hold for 5, out for 5, hold for 5. Even mindfulness has a cognitive component. So where people are really upregulated, they're not going to do mindfulness. I use a lot of things, the tapping, which is very big in the States. You tap on acupressure points while you're saying things. We don't know quite why, but these points on the body seem to kick down the back of the brain very quickly. I've got a 7-minute kind of sequence of you bilaterally crossing over, Qigong, and the bilateral crossing overs like this and squatting, it seems to do something to the brain, all body-based. So I once had an Afghani boy come into my room. And I looked at him and I said, geez, you've got a 2,000-yard look in those eyes. And he went, yep. And I said, so how are you? And he goes, oh, I'm like 100 out of 10. Okay. I said to him, literally, I'm going to do some really weird looking stuff. Forgive me, but just copy me. And I stood up and we did all this stuff. We did some tapping, we did some breathing. And I said, sit down. Where are you now? And he went, whew, it's like it's gone out of my body. And that was in 5 minutes. And in that point, we were ready now to begin to have a conversation. There are things I recommend like yoga, yin yoga. I had an Afghani boy tell me to do yin yoga. And I went, well, I don't bend. You know, as a runner, I would put on a pair of shoes, run, come back home. And that was it, no stretching. So I'm rigid. And so I started yoga, and it's the yin yoga, which is just holding one position in discomfort. Because what do we like as veterans? We love a little bit of discomfort. It's a challenge. We want to push those parts of ourselves. And I do push the guys a bit. I get a bit more extreme sometimes because I took on about a year and a half, year and 3/4 ago, the cold water stuff, Wim Hof, who's big, I think, a bit in the States, where it's breathing techniques, but it's also exposing yourself to cold water. Because every part of my life, I'm looking for little levels of discomfort that when I achieve them every day, I'm back from the passenger seat into the driver's seat. And I've had numbers of guys who, like myself, have their cold water shower. And we know that cold water or drinking a glass of cold water kicks down the back of the brain quickly. So everything I'm doing in the first session is when you leave here, you got to learn how to kick down from your ambush and get here. Because here, you're less likely to react when you get home. Here, you're less likely to get overwhelmed. Your stress is reduced. Therefore, your anxiety is reduced. Now you're ready to deal with the deeper stuff. It's like you want to service your car before you go for a long drive. The long drive is the falling into the middle of your ambush zone, the exposure therapy. Bam, you're right in the middle of this stuff. Well, let's service the engine first. Let's get everybody grounded in their bodies. Let's get them familiar with their bodies, and then let's get them disciplined enough to do something every single day so they're back in control. Then what I do is we define what's your ambush zone. And they tell me what the ambush zone. It might have been, a mate who got lost in a fire that you had to pull him out, or a child that got lost, or it might have been a friend that was shot next to you in an ambush. And I go, okay, so there's your ambush zone. That's at the core where all your trip flares are. Let's withdraw to the perimeter of your ambush zone and now look at it. Where do you want to begin? Not where do I want to begin? Because I'm leading the way. And if I'm leading the way, I've made my first mistake again. Where do you want to begin? And they go, well, there are these situations I feel I can start to work on. I'm guided by them. And when we work on them, it's when you think about this, what do you feel in your body? I move from story to the body. Well, geez, when I feel about that officer who shamed me, so we have a moral injury, that officer shamed me and made me feel really useless. I feel this shame and this anger in my body. And with the approach I use, brain spotting, I go, okay, and it's a bit like EMDR, stay with the feeling in your body. And briefly how it works is if you watch people when you talk to them, I might be talking about something and I'll go, I remember when I was in that situation, wherever the brain goes, the eye goes. EMDR uses eye movements. But this one, it finds the one point related to that experience. And we find it, there are ways to do that. Then I go, stay with that point, don't look at me. Now I'm no longer directing it. I'm with them. And the story works like this. I'll simply go, we're not going to talk, stay with it, and let's breathe. And let's be curious observers to what your body and your brain want to bring to us today and to you. I'm no longer leading the story. Because when we combine the memory with the brain spot, there's a direct link between the front and the back of the brain. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to direct it at that point. And then they will go, oh, I don't know why, but I just remember this ambush. I'm not going to broaden the story. All I'm going to say is good. Just stay with that and let's see what happens. And the body's just releasing. We become curious observers rather than myself driving the experience forward. Now, EMDR and brain spotting are two fabulous modalities for getting. They're body-based modalities because they take people into the body. When we ignore the body, we ignore the territory that's critical for healing. And so I was constantly looking for ways that were respectful and gentle to sit with people and allow them an opportunity to heal. And part of what I've learned as well is that showing the respect and understanding for the language of their territory and who they are, and not expecting them to step into my territory, but that I would enter their territory with an openness to use what came from that wanting to share who they were, rather than these are my tools and I'm going to use them, that they were already starting to heal. Now, my book is driven for people working with veterans to help them learn what took me 20 years to learn. And even as a veteran, I had to learn. It wasn't enough. Just being a veteran and my clinical training wasn't enough. So the book works at that level. I I avoided actually writing a book for a long time. And shortly after that book, I did this one. It was the first Which Way Is Your Warrior Facing? Okay, and this was, and then I did a PDF and I printed 5 copies out for my children. And this is the one for my wife, the only hard copy one. And it was filled with photographs of my stories and my adventures and all the crazy things I've done. And then I took out a publishing contract with an organization called Book Locker in the USA, because they have a veteran on their board, and they also, they choose the books that they want to publish. And I liked the sense of that. And then I was just went, I just don't have it in me to write a book anymore. I'm busy, I'm working long days. And 2 years later, December last year, I sat down and it was just like a bolt of lightning hit me. And I just took everything that I had done and I started writing that book that has just been published. And I didn't have an idea about how I wanted to do it. It was something that started forming, a bit like when I've been working with veterans, it formed on the way. And I realized that I didn't just want it to be a book at all. What I wanted was something that became a working experience. It was the reader and I were going to go on a patrol together through their territory. And so at the end of each chapter, I'll see if I can show you. So at the end of each chapter, because I know, as veterans, we like things to be precise. We don't like too much verbiage. So there's that. It's a brief point form summary that they can look at. Then I found myself wondering, well, after each chapter, what can I do here? And so I created a journal that's in the book. And so, for example, I wrote a long time ago for veterans, a letter for a veteran to the partner, because none of us, we all find it difficult to talk about our service, whatever kind of service it is, because we worry that people won't understand, they'll judge us, and some things are so painful to talk about that we're not going to do it. And I'm part of that generation. I don't talk a lot about the war at all. And even with my mates that were in the war, we tend to not go there at all. But that not talking in a relationship really causes a lot of problems, because our partners feel locked out of our world. They see that we suffer, but we won't share, and they don't understand that. But they see us hanging with our mates, and they look at us and they think, geez, you know what? It almost feels you have a more intimate relationship with your mates than you do with me. When you're with them, you come out of yourself, you're relaxed, you're happy, you come home, you're just a really challenging human being. And so I thought, how do we bridge that? So I wrote this letter, and then in the book, I thought, well, what if I invited the people reading the book to write their own letter? And so I left several pages, and so a veteran can write his letter. He can even sit, if he wants to, with his partner and formulate that letter together. It can be a shared activity. Or he can write it and give it, his letter, not my letter, his letter to his partner to read. And it can, and it doesn't have to be discussed. I'm going to give you something, I want you to read it. This will help you understand. That's the first step to bridging the gap. As first responders and veterans, we are a different kind of animal. We think differently. Our awareness of our environments is different. Our perceptions of how things move around us is different. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And so for partners of veterans, you're married to an unusual kind of animal. And you need to understand them as much as they need to understand how to integrate back into civilian life. And then the last thing I did in the book was I took all the things that I felt were useful, and I called it bite-sized pieces or bite-sized thoughts for transitioning veterans. And so at the back of the book, or transition warriors, there are just endless little pieces I took out. So somebody can go to the back in a moment. I don't want to read the book at the moment, but I'll go and I'll choose something here that resonates with me. And I'm just going to think about that for a while. So the book is multiple doorways, and it encapsulated an understanding of territory, creating a map of all the aspects of the transitioning territory, allowing participation in this and forming of this map and this compass, bridging into those around you, and for professionals working with veterans. And so finally, this formed, and I went, this is the best that I can do. Maybe it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be the best thing on the market, but it was a book which was born from the dust of the territory. It is not an evidence-based book, and it does not come from academics down. It's born in that dust. So my drive has always been, I get paid for my job in a school, and I get paid. Veterans do not pay to see me. It's a free service in this country, and there's some veterans I've seen, for a couple of years. So it's a very privileged service. But I was in a good, fortunate position that financially I can give service, and I love being of service. And the population I wanted to be of service was my tribe. My tribe broadly is not just military, but as a first responder, we still speak the same language. At our core, we sing the same tune. We know each other. We do. And so the service component has been really critical for me. So I've rambled. There's so much to cover. I'm never going to cover it all. But that's been my journey, and it's always evolving. And I'm just always so grateful for the people I've met and the brothers. And by brothers, I will, brothers or sisters, I don't know, we've called each other brothers. Maybe that's got to change in time. But for the brothers that I've sat with and I have a deep love and a care for. And that book is finally, I'm going to leave this planet in time. And I wanted to leave my song behind, something that lived after I was no longer here. Both, I wanted initially for my children to have something that they could go back to when I was no longer here. But I wanted to ensure that 20 years and the more that I have ahead of me didn't just dissipate into ether, but there was something that could make a difference. And it's, so it's difficult to do on my own. And so I always say to people, if what I've written, and that's why the ebook is free, the hard copy is not free. I can't afford to. By the time I bring it from the States and post it out, I'm going to be out of pocket big time. So the book, if people want the book, that they can buy, but it was always at the lowest price the publishers would allow. But the ebook is the act of service that if you feel it's got value, give it out to everybody every organization because that's the wave that I want to spread out. I want to spread out that I think there's something in what I've learned the hard way and over long years that I feel has got value. And it comes from the territory that people understand. And if I can create a ripple of change, it can grow and it can grow and it can grow. So that's my story.
Oh, Barry, that was so interesting. That was so loaded with just important information and perspective, and a great way to support. I just feel like there's so much. I wrote like pages of notes, and I thank you so much. I know I'm going to have more questions and things at the end, but I want to get everybody's questions and comments in here. I just want to thank you. Thank you.
No, look, I should be thanking you for, as much as I thank every person that has trusted me to walk in my room and made me a better person, I want to thank you for the opportunity. It's really both ways.
Oh, that's wonderful. Janet, what, you have a question or a comment?
Well, I just want to say that this is amazing. Thank you for sharing. I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow on journaling. And so I'm marking on here, okay, I do this. So how did you put it into place and stuff? So thank you for that, because journaling is a huge thing that we don't do enough. And we just have a different concept of it. But I want to thank you. I'm just ordering the Kindle, the ebook now.
No, don't. You can
And
get it. You can get it free. No. Sarah's going to send it to you for free.
oh,
It
okay.
should be attached on the last email today.
I'll look for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, please
The whole
don't.
thing.
Yeah, don't order the ebook. I mean, the ebook is a very low price anyway, but I don't care about the price. I couldn't make it free. I'm not allowed to. But they said that because it's a PDF ebook, they recognize that anybody can download it and send it. And they said, that's life. So I went, this is good. And then I
Okay.
said to them, so can I put it up on my social media? And they said, no, don't do that, because now we could be in a lot of trouble, but you can send it off to people by email. So don't buy the ebook. If you wanted the book, that's your decision, but the ebook is free.
Well, thank you very much. And I really enjoyed this, and looking forward to following you more. So thank you.
Thanks, Janet.
And I just want to hop on that. Yes, Janet is sharing. She's facilitating tomorrow at 11 a.m. on the Power of Our Story. That's going to be her journaling
Oh, great. Yeah.
for legacy. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm going to be there too.
Yeah.
Okay, Todd.
You muted, Todd. Yeah.
There we go. That was pretty mind-blowing. Thank you. What caught me was, and we call ourselves a tribe here, and that is what I discovered was key to me not blowing my brains out.
Yeah.
Was a member of my tribe. I was torn away from my tribe pretty spectacularly. I took a dive through a staircase in a house fire, and my career ended really fast, and I was completely lost. I had no idea who I was, and just a couple of years ago, I had spent decades staying alive because my daughters needed money. That was my excuse for not killing myself, was that I needed to make money so that my daughters could grow up and have the things that they need, even though I wasn't around them anymore. And a couple of years ago, I realized that they didn't need me anymore. And that was in 2020, and it was a friend that I had met a year earlier. He wasn't another firefighter, but he was a corrections officer, and he did a buddy check, and he didn't believe the bullshit answer that I gave him the first time, and that was what really saved my life. And so I work for a farmers cooperative now, and just out of desperation to find help, I contacted their employee assistance program, which is such a crapshoot in terms of who you're going to get. And I was just absolutely without any confidence. There was nobody outside of the circle of my experience that I was going to trust. If it wasn't somebody who had shared that common experience with what I'd been through as a firefighter, there was no way I was going to be able to even talk to them, let alone trust them to help me. And the good Lord intervened on my behalf. They selected a therapist. I don't know how they did, but I showed up at his office, and he was not only a former minister, but he was a retired West Des Moines cop.
Oh, wow.
And that was what led me to be able to spill my guts to him, and that led me to where I'm at today, which I call an emotional equinox. I live as much in the light now as I do in the dark, and now that's what drives me to get into peer support, because I know that there's so many of my brothers and my sisters out there that are still walking through hell, and that they're not going to look at anybody outside their tribe and be able to trust them. And if I can get that process started and show them that, you know, that there's a way out of there, and maybe lead them then to someone who may not necessarily be part of that tribe, but can help them, get them to a clinician, get them to somebody that can then get them the help they need, then that's what I feel my calling is. So I just, when you talk about tribe, that really hits home for me more than anything else. Thank you so much. I just have absolutely really enjoyed hearing your story.
Yeah, thanks, Todd, but also thanks for sharing your story. And yeah, tribe is important. I also want to say that for those people that have a strong, in this case, it would be a Christian-based approach. There is Project Healing Heroes run by Lieutenant Colonel Reverend David Grand, and he's developing a 6 series of books, which is a faith-based approach to healing. And they are extraordinary. You know, I'm not a Christian, but I can tell you this stuff is beautiful. So it's worth looking at Project Healing Heroes. And I think the resource, when he's got it all together, is going to be profound, because it combines faith with good approaches to managing trauma. It interweaves the two. And I think sometimes when you combine faith with everything else, it's that added kick in to healing ourselves and healing the grief and the pain that we do carry. So yeah, but thanks for sharing your story, mate. Appreciate it. David,
right.
yeah.
David, yes.
Hey, Barry.
Hey, mate.
Thanks for sharing, my friend. So first of all, your voice is so captivating. Just the way you talk, I find to be just so unbelievably relaxing. I feel like I went through an hour's worth of therapy and, you know, massage and a sauna, and I had no $10 copay, which was freaking awesome. So thank you for your just near natural charisma in that awesome, relaxing way. I just find your whole approach pretty captivating, and you know, for the most part, I'm not a veteran, but most part, veterans and first responders, which is, you know, my background, we're very visual and tangible people, and we need concrete examples to justify what could otherwise, you know, be not real. And when you talk about the pull through stuff, to me, that just really resonates, and I appreciate that visual, that tangible. I think that's pretty cool. And when you can make that juxtaposition between something that's conceptual and something that's actual, even if they're not in real time related, for me, you get those visuals, and I love that. And so much of what you talk about is the things that I've worked on over the last two years, going through my own stuff. So thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for the people's lives that you change. And when you talk about how you working with others change your life as well, I love that, because I know that's been the success for me as well. But don't underestimate yourself, and the people that you've changed, and the people that have been able to keep going forward because the work you do is probably indescribable and unsurmountable. So thank you for all that, and for being there for those that utilize your services. I appreciate it.
Thanks, David. And you know what I say to everybody, everything I'm talking to you about is what I do. Is I get up every day, and it doesn't matter how I feel. I get on the mat and I do my stuff. You know, I'm disciplined. I haven't had a hot shower for nearly 18 months. And I must tell you, sometimes I'm sitting there and it's 5 degrees outside, and I'm going, oh. And my wife just looks at me and goes, "You're all right." But you know, at that point is my area of, where am I now? Am I still running this race, or am I going to turn into a really sad old man? And at that point, I just go whack, and then my body just celebrates the water, and I realize, you know what? I'm always in control here. And even when I'm not in control, I know the things I can do to put me back in the driver's seat. So I share with the guys everything that I do. I live it. It's not out of a book. I live it. So yeah, I think that's important.
And that's so important. And you know, Jocko Willink, who I'm sure you're familiar with,
I know.
Equals freedom. And that concept of remaining disciplined does allow you to move forward in that controlled and intentional way, in that purposeful way. And that's certainly something that I strive for every day, and hopefully someday we'll be able to achieve. But thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, pleasure.
Things
Yeah.
to add while we're on the Perez hand raising moment.
I took it down. You're out.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Sarah. You can pass the torch. I always think it's so interesting when you can relate different worlds. And as I said up front, I work in marketing, which is very psychologically based in understanding, and in the business world, for which maybe some of you are in as well. But I always think of the concept of control, like what can you control, what can you influence, and what do you need to let go of? And that's a really important construct in my world. And I think it really does play into a lot of the behavior that you were talking about. So I just wanted to share that thought. But the other thing is I want to meet your wife, because I think she and I have never seen a doorway of any establishment ever. So I could totally relate to that concept. And it really struck me. And I said, David, it's amazing how there's such consistency in human behavior with such a global view. And so much of our world comes back to the power of relationships and communication and an understanding us as humans and as people. So it was such a powerful, slew of examples. So thank you for sharing. They were so relatable to me as a wife and partner as well.
Yeah, thank you. And it just bears evidence to the fact that, as first responders and veterans, when we start to put ourselves back in the driver's seat and we start to heal, we bring beautiful qualities because we are naturally dedicated to service, to care, to protect, to listen. And then those parts of us can come out, and our partners finally see the strengths and the gifts of who we are. And we have a right to go back to that. We just do. We know that the brain and the body is capable of incredible levels of change and transformation. It's plasticity. So there's always hope. And, I often have the guy say to me, they might be in their 40s and they go, I'm 40 years old, look at my life. And I say to them, the first 60 years of my life were hard work. And I'm not just talking about the war, they were hard work. So I only started getting real happiness and content from 60. So I said, 40, you're doing all right. So there are levels at which I can reframe and contextualize, because I wish I knew now what I did in my 30s. I might have made far fewer mistakes as I screamed out into the world and made bad choices in many things of relationships. Thank God, my focus has always been on physical fitness and well-being and nutrition. And I'm a raw food vegan at this point in my life. And my kids are meat eaters, and I don't have a problem with that. But, I've looked after myself, and I think that's been a strong protective factor. So
without those mistakes, you wouldn't be able to do the work you do today.
No, I
those
wouldn't.
Mistakes are happy happenings. And I love it's, none of us are scientists, but the whole idea of understanding neuroplasticity, I think, is so important. And one of the things we teach in our resiliency classes is the neurons that wire together, fire together.
Spot on.
And so to be able to understand how that can change and how you can reroute things, I think is so important when, again, we're tangible folks. And when you can put that science into visual and understand how the brain then reforms itself as you change and evolve, I think is so important as well.
Well, that's another protocol that I use is, everything in our training is repetition over time. So the ability to strip a weapon, at first, it's pretty confusing, but, several weeks down the line, several months down the line, you can do it in the dark and blindfolded. And so, when you equate that to the neuroplasticity stuff, I'll often tell the guys, at the end of each day, think about or write down 3 little things you could be grateful for: the sound of a bird in the trees, the smell of your wife's perfume, the dog that greets you at the door. Do it every day. And I tell them between here and here is the fake it till you make it. And I explain that neurons are naturally attracted to positive statements, but it's not going to happen over time. It's like getting fit. You got to fake you're enjoying this till you finally do enjoy it. And I tell them, if you just do it long enough, it'll work. So I explain the neuroscience, I put it in operational terms, and just get them doing it. Doesn't matter if you get change or not, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, good point, David. Thanks.
Gosh, this is so inspiring. Chris. Oh, there you go.
Thank you so much, man. What everybody else has said is spot on. Not that you need any validation from me, but what you said, the way you present, is kind of validated by the way Doc Shauna Springer says as well. She never served. She wasn't a first responder, but yet she's earned the trust of so many tip of the spear individuals across the world by that selfless way of humility about you that just earns people's immediate trust. And you very much have that same vibe. So I have two questions for you to see if you can elaborate for me. One is, how did you become so self-aware and have the courage that you
Sorry, Chris, you just cut off. Say again. How did you become how did you become self-aware and have the courage to
address those things?
Yeah.
And set that plan, and then within the way, I think I speculate I know the answer, but then how do you talk within your way to get people to become self-aware and have that self-integrity to get past that no I'm just fine, but walk through them with them that path so that they can recognize it and then have that support system that you offer right there with them?
So the first thing is, I'm one of those blokes that does not learn too well by introspection. I learn through adversity, unfortunately. As I still have done to this day, I push the edges of things. And so how I learned was 2 divorces, 5 immigrations, and a whole lot of chaos in between. And so I was literally kicked in the guts time and time again, and sat in dark corners trying to just go, geez, I can't do this anymore. So I learned from, it's like the phoenix metaphor, from into the fire, from the ashes into change. It's like the samurai sword, and I use this with the guys as well, is that it's formed by taking metal, putting it in the fire, hammering it out, and in the fire again. It's layer on layer on layer. I'm one of those guys that needed to be cooked, hammered out, put back in, hammered out. Eventually, the samurai sword is a flexible but very powerful instrument. So I learned through adversity. What I want to do with guys and how do I share what I've learned is I don't go into their ambush zones without their permission, and generally they don't want to go there. But if we start at the perimeter and slowly walk in, we build a resilience for them to finally develop confidence, to feel like they're in the front seat of their car driving, and they're experiencing success in managing the small things, and they're maintaining regular pull-throughs. It naturally comes. It's like, how do you learn to how do you learn to survive an ultramarathon? Well, you're not going to figure that out if somebody just picks you up and throws you at the starting line and go, there's 100 Ks, off you go. You start off on 1K, 2Ks, 3Ks, 5Ks, half marathon, marathons. So I have the same approach. We start in their territory. We identify where we're going to begin. We build a deep relationship of love and trust and respect, and we move slowly. And then without knowing it, they're already discovering those parts of who we are. They are. It just happens.
I love it, man. It's very organic and natural. Nothing's pushed. And your ability to check your ego and just kind of let it happen, man, that's something fantastic. Thank you so much, Barry.
And I want to say, Shauna Springer nailed it. Our challenge is, as helping professionals, are we going to become the doctor? And she defines the doctor that he walks in the room, they walk in your room, they sit in the chair you define, and there's certificates on the wall. They will diagnose you, tell you what your disorder is, and treat you. I call them technicians of the soul, and there's a place for them. Shauna's challenge is, you want to become a doctor, or you want to become a doc? A doc earns the right through love and deep care of the people you sit with, and the ability to listen without always having to impose. Now, I want to be a doc. I don't want to be a doctor. There are doctors, and I leave that to them. That's good. but that's not what I want. And so Shauna nails it really well in both her first book and her second book with Michael, which I've read as well. And, you know, that's more the first responder stuff. But yeah, she's really worth listening to be the doc.
Therein lies
Thank
that
you.
power, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing as Chris. I was, you know, that spirit of humility and generosity, Barry, to just really desire to share everything that you've learned, that you've had to suffer through, and, you know, just be molded in the fire. Your legacy is so huge, and it's really exciting to really just see the humility that you offer this in. It's just truly a labor of love. And it's really wonderful to have you share. And I'm excited to be able to help share your book.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's hard work from here. I must tell you, it feels like I'm hitting a wall at times because it's not evidence-based. So you know, it's difficult. So anybody who sees value in it, please just get it out there, give it away, do what you need to do.
Isn't that, you know, isn't that something that, I mean, I understand the value of evidence-based, but when you feel the truth just resonate in your core, isn't that where the true healing happens? I mean,
yeah, it does, Sarah. But, you know, also, you know, remember that evidence-based is the money that's been poured into proving a modality works. Now, we know that carrying a pistol works in certain scenarios. But if you take that pistol into other territories, you may find yourself in a tricky position, which means that every territory defines the nature of the tools, the weapons, the protocols you bring into it. There cannot be one set that applies across every territory. So why do we feel that one or two modalities fit everything? That is contrary to what we trained as veterans and first responders. We're constantly having to adjust and adapt how you search a house, how you move through dangerous territory, the demands of the territory. We're constantly adjusting. Well, why aren't we doing that with the tools we use?
yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. Janet.
Thanks. Barry, you mentioned it's not evidence-based. I'll disagree to that a bit here. You say your book isn't academic, and you talked about doctors. Doctors are going what a book and what they were trained. Evidence-based only goes so far. We know those who have suffered a trauma goes into our bodies. We create all kind of illness. That's a fact. And I know that I had years and years of health issues, but not one doctor said, let's see what's going on in your life. Not one.
Yeah.
If they had attention, that's evidence of what my body was going through. So I think that sometimes we put things in these categories that really need to get thrown out, and just trust that what we're doing and what you're doing and what Doc is doing, that is our evidence. We're seeing the results. It doesn't have to happen in a laboratory. It's happening in real life. So
yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think that approach is shaking the ivory tower trees in many different places. And, you know, the biggest thing that was brought to my awareness, now let's say I've left the military. In the military, let's say I was distributing uniforms. That's all I did. But I spent 20 years in the military. It was part of who I am. I get into transitioning life. I've lost everything. I don't know where I belong. I can't adjust my language, everything. So what happens is I start getting stressed, anxious. My sleep is impacted on because of that. I start getting depressed because I don't know how to work. Nobody's waiting for me. I become angry and irritable. So now I go and see somebody and they say, so what's your problem? Well, I've just come out the military and these are my symptoms. And they go, well, you know, you're clearly suffering from post-traumatic stress. Now, my thing is, well, is that traumatic stress or is that transitional? And that is why I'm starting a series of podcasts. I'll have a while to get there, but it's called the PMTC podcast. And it's the one thing, it's not even around yet. So I've avoided that, but I'm slowly getting to it. But in my book, I talk about post-military transitioning challenges. And I'll often say to the guys, you know what? It's nothing I can find in the military, but it's understandable you're going through this at the moment. And I use the term because of the following. It's post-military, so it's not military, it's new territory. You're redefining yourself. It's transitional, which means it's got a beginning and an end. So it's okay. You're supposed to suffer. It's like telling me I'm not going to suffer when I run an ultramarathon. Trust me, you suffer big time. And the last part is it's a challenge, and we love challenges. So I've got this wonderful challenge to navigate through this transitional process and redefine who I am. I'm normalizing and reframing. So, you know, in the book, I don't talk too much about that because it's not a diagnostic term. But it's certainly something if I tell somebody, well, you're disordered, you got post-traumatic stress disorder now. That's what it's turned into. Now I'm disordered. I'm a mess. And now what? Where am I going to go from there? But no, you're in an excited. It's like telling me at the 65 kilometer mark of an ultramarathon, everything you're experiencing, you are really suffering a post-trauma disorder from your run. I'm not going to finish the run. But if somebody says to me, you know what, you hurt, it's okay. Get comfortable with the pain. Keep going. I'm going to go. We reframe. So yeah. So that was part of why I often say I think we need to be careful before we diagnose. We need to think carefully. Like Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand before you expect to be understood. We need to do more of that.
It just makes so much sense. You know, it's painful to hear so many stories, so many veteran stories, when you know that there's people like you, Barry, that just do have such a deep understanding because you've been humble and you've gone through so much yourself. And it just, I just appreciate so much what you're doing, because I know what you're saying and doing, the healing language, all the experience and your education, all of that is working together. And then you still come with a position of humility to let the person lead and teach you about them. It's just a beautiful thing. And I really appreciate what you're doing.
Pleasure.
Yes. Does anybody have any last comments before we say goodnight?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, guys. It was such a joy to connect with you all. You know, in these moments, I reconnect with my tribe. My tribe is so dispersed. I have a couple of my army mates around in New Zealand and around the world, but to sit in tribe again just opens my heart, and it has a lot of meaning for me because I miss my tribe. And I want to thank each and every one of you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you. And you know, Barry, you know that you have another family here.
Yeah, I'll be back.
Yes, we would love to have you. We would love to. It always, the conversation changes every week, and but it's always together. So
yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for, you know, offering to join the group. It's really great.
Absolutely.
I'd love to keep returning.
Yeah, and there's never any pressure too. Like nobody's going to hold you accountable for coming or missing. So yes, well, I'm going to go ahead and just end, and then we can talk from there.